Dili ba sila ni nag-team pero pag i-open mo dilaw, parang siya
So, ani na lang sa siguro, Sarah, isend sa ko sa email kasi marag dili gyud siya mag-work sa imong cellphone. No? And for this moment, until na ma-send na siya sa ako ang cellphone, then we're going to, cellphone sa ako ang email, then we're going to start with what you have presented na lang muna. So, for this moment, let me present to you some more information on actually mas nice ani kaning in agribusiness, no? Kani siya kaso 1 hour siya, but we can still utilize in some other point, no? So Sarah, mag-share na lang sa screen, ha. So i-send na lang siya sa email.
Okay po, ma'am.
Sige, sige.
ay, bakit? Nagulat na ko ba na ako na. Bakit hindi na Maria ba? Ay, bakit?
Wala ba niya dito?
Wala, kasi naman ginapalit ng mga banana.
So I posted something you can write up. Just off the top of your head, what makes a great case study? So actually, start off with actually having you all get some ideas down, kind of where you might be in that thought process. I'd be very interested in knowing, and we can define great. What's a great case study? Write down something either and or in terms of what makes it great for the student sitting in the classroom. Why would a student consider something to be a great case study? And or from a teaching perspective, from your perspective as instructor, professor, using case studies, or maybe somebody with an extension appointment using case studies out to an extension audience. So any of those touch points in terms of idea of what makes a great case study, I would really appreciate you taking a little bit of time right now just to write down, jot down a few ideas. So what makes a great case study? So actually, we're going to have a little dead air here. That seems strange in a webinar setting, but I'm going to be quiet for about 30 seconds. And then about 30 again, perspectives of what makes a great case study from the point of view of you as an instructor, you as a person delivering to such audience, from a student's perspective. Go ahead and just hopefully have something that's allowed, and then I'd like to move on to the next slide and kind of move forward. So, in my experience with writing case studies and teaching with case studies, I have kind of come up with this list that is really just from personal experience. There's really no formal citations here, just from my perspective, what makes a great case. I think the critical component of a really well done case is first off, there's got to be kind of this central pivot point, this inflection point, a trigger, a decision needs to be made. And so oftentimes that's how cases are presented, how they're written. This idea that, hey, we're at an event, we're at an inflection point in the history of the company, an agribusiness, and some kind of decision needs to be resolved. And so that's kind of what I would say is central to any good case. And I want to talk about a particular case that I'm currently writing and use that as kind of a reference point for these bullet points in terms of contextualizing the ideas that I'm trying to present. So right now I'm currently writing a case study. It's about the Willamette Valley Vineyards. That's a company here in Oregon. It's one of the largest integrated vineyards in Oregon. And by integrated, I mean they have their own vineyards where they grow use their own grapes. They buy grapes from other producers. They also obviously make wines. And so it's a very large enterprise. They currently have multiple wineries throughout the state and actually have a winery vineyard down in California, ABA. So thinking about what would be the inflection point for writing about this case study, writing about this Oregon company, Willamette Valley Vineyards. Initially, I had this really nice conversation with the CEO and founder of Willamette Valley Vineyards. And it was at a point in that company's history where they were really looking at significant growth. They had, by name, had been very active in the Willamette Valley. Willamette is a river here in West in the Willamette Valley. He was one of the first innovators, first to bring in wine. Not the first, but one of the earlier developers of the wine industry here. And so he very astutely took ownership of the title Willamette Valley and has named his vineyards that, and his wines are known by that name. And yet now Oregon has 5 major wine producing regions. We've kind of become a statewide industry. And in his mind, he was seeing, is there an opportunity for strategic growth to kind of actually invest in and develop wines throughout the state instead of just the Willamette Valley? So that was originally my thought for an inflection point. Let's grow. Let's grow as the state's industry has grown. Let's reflect that. And so then maybe have the case study centered around how do we go about that growth, implementing that growth strategy. Well, that conversation that I had with Jim was about, well, now going on 2 years ago. And quite honestly, the growth strategy has been implemented for about 18 months. And so, I mean, time got away, I got busy, the other things got, well, anyway, it just didn't happen. I don't know if that probably doesn't happen to anybody else in Weir 72, but I had this opportunity and it was slipping away. And so then I really had to think and rethink the inflection point. And so now I happen to have a friend. He does, he's a financial advisor for small investors and for households, personal investing. And we've talked about Willamette Valley Vineyards. And what makes it particularly interesting is that it's actually a publicly held company. It was incorporated. It's traded on NASDAQ. So it's a publicly traded company. I think it's probably currently the only winery that currently has that status. And so he, as a financial advisor, personal financial advisor, he has a lot of clients that actually own stock in this winery. And so for me now, I've got a new idea for an inflection point, and this is how I'm writing the case, is that he's got a client coming in saying, hey, I would like to invest in this winery. I'd like to buy some of their common stock, or next time they issue preferred stock, I'd like to be in on that. And I would like to invest in this winery. You know, that's going to be the inflection point. I kind of like that one in the sense of it's a somewhat timely, it's timeless in the sense that we could read that case 5 years from now and it could still be a scenario where a financial advisor has somebody come in wanting to invest in the winery. Whereas the growth strategy as an inflection point, like I said, that's already getting a little stale. And so that's an opportunity to have a critical decision. Should I advise this client to invest or not invest in Willamette Valley Vineyard? Other important parts of a case study, I want to get through these fairly quickly. Relevant, timely, and substantive context for the readers, for the students. By relevant, that's something that the students can relate to. So oftentimes that's geographic specific. A lot of times that is commodity specific. And so I used to try to use case studies to internationalize my curriculum. So I would try to find case studies about companies in India or in France or in Germany or wherever. And to some degree that works, but the students are not comfortable with those case studies. They want it to be as close to what they know as it can be and still be relevant for advancing whatever you're trying to teach in your classroom. So relevant is a way to engage students. The closer it is to home, the more likely they're going to really get into the case. At least that's been a general statement about the cases I've used. But sometimes it almost goes to the point of absurdity. Several years ago, I had some feedback from students saying we had great cases, but none of them were about the animal industry. There weren't any livestock cases or any agribusinesses related to animal agriculture. So, okay, fine. I can see that. Out of 5 cases, we were 0 for 5. So the next year I taught the class, I added a livestock case. And then what was my student feedback? I then got back from the folks with the beef industry or the livestock background saying, well, we really like the cases, but there was only one that was about the livestock industry. So, I mean, I couldn't win. And that's going to be true. So if I do all livestock, then of course, people in the nursery industry or the fruits and vegetable industries or whatever, no one's going to be happy. And so sometimes the expectation of the students, you just have to kind of coach them into thinking that there are lessons to be learned across commodities, across geographies. Timely, obviously, the sooner, the less time between when the case was written and when the case is taught. There's both just the sense of validity in the minds of the students. Okay, this is worth reading because it just happened last year, versus why am I reading something about a company that happened to that company before I was born? And so if you have a 20-year-old case, you kind of lose that. And by substantive, there's got to be enough substance to the context to really give the students something to wrestle with, something to really work over and analyze. John Siebert in 2016 gave a talk at Weir 72 about his experiences with writing and developing and publishing case studies. And a point that he made that I still remember was that many of his cases, well, in general, his rule was, if you don't have the financials, you don't have a publishable case. And he really emphasized that you need to have the numbers. You got to have the financial data in order to move a case forward through a publication process. And so he published most of his teaching cases about cooperatives because that information is largely available to the public. As I look at Willamette Valley Vineyards, I also have a ton of financial data because it's a publicly traded company. They have to issue prospectus. That information is out there. It's public domain. And so it's an excellent example of kind of meeting that need for a substantive financial data, at least, because a lot of companies, private companies, if you try to do a case study, that's proprietary information. They don't want to share information about how much money they've got in the company, what the profit margins are, anything like that. It's really, really tough to kind of get that data available. So again, having that substantive context, you don't have to have the financials to have a really good case, but they certainly help. You do need a really good body of information that the students can dive into and make the most of. I also think that a great case has to be sufficiently ambiguous. With the Willamette Valley Vineyard example, do we invest or do we not invest? There's a great amount of ambiguity because if you look at it, it's production agriculture with seasonality and year-to-year variances, and it has a lot of volatility. It doesn't have a lot of growth. If you take the standard metrics of, is this a good stock? Is this a good company to invest in? Quite honestly, a lot of stock advisors and stock pickers would say, no, don't buy that stock. And so now we have this ambiguity because it kind of goes against the norm. But there's other things that get people to invest in Willamette Valley Vineyards. And Eric, my friend, the financial advisor, says his clients that have stock in WVV are loyal as anything. They wouldn't give up that stock for anything. And so then you have to start, well, it's not about the dividends or just the dividends. And no, it's not, because as a stock holder, you're treated as kind of a premier wine club member, so you get discounts on the wine that you buy from them. You get access, privileged, or not privileged, but enhanced tasting room experiences. You can actually go volunteer during the grape harvest and the grape crush. If you want to go walk in grapes, they'll let you do that to crush the grapes. And so there's all these extra non-monetary rewards, non-dividends that come with being an investor in the company. And so now we have some fodder to think about what are the metrics that matter in terms of stock performance, what are the motivations for personal investment, what are financial returns as a measure of performance relative to other measures of and metrics of performance. So there's some ambiguity there, and so that actually helps foster creativity and diverse opinions and conversation. And a good case study has multiple correct answers, which is always much to the frustration of at least a subset of my students. What's the answer? What's the right answer? And with case study, really there probably shouldn't be a single the answer. Clearly framed time frame, pick one, or timeline. So this I just wanted to put out there as a way to suggest that with case studies, it doesn't always have to be at the third point down there, decision phase. Right now we have a decision: do we pick this growth strategy or that growth strategy? There can be a lot of other things that could come into play. There's other inflection points, recognition that, oh, we don't have a succession plan. So what does that mean? What would a succession plan look like? Maybe there's a trigger event, next generation, a child is coming back to a farming operation. And so now we've got that event happening. How are we going to structure the organization? How are we going to plan succession, et cetera? So we've got various timelines that you can fit in. With the WVB, as someone coming in wanting to invest in that, then if that's the inflection point, it might be, I can write this case as an investigation phase. Okay, well, let's look into the pros and cons of investing in Willamette Valley Vineyard and the trade-offs, and then, or it could be a decision phase. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, invest, don't invest is kind of the decision that the students have to make at the end of the case. And then lastly, some red herrings, and by that I mean some sidebar information. One of the cool things about the story about Willamette Valley Vineyard is that they've been able to track their investors are also some of their best clients, some of their most loyal clients. And so they've actually looked at the net revenues they get from the wine they sell to their investors, and the revenue they generate from the sales to their investors exceeds the dividends that they pay to those investors. So actually, basically, if you're an investor in Willamette Valley Vineyard, on average, you're actually generating more revenue than you're getting paid in dividends. And as Jim pointed out to me when I interviewed him, he basically said, that means we have free capital, because all the capital we're getting through our stock is actually paying for itself, and the dividends we get back in terms of net revenues. And so you can work that kind of into the story of the case study as kind of it's not central to what the case may be about in terms of the decision, but suddenly you've got students kind of diverted by this extra rich dialogue and storytelling. And really you need to help students, a well-written case helps students discern what's important and what's kind of to be put off to the side. And so a well-written case will have both of those, a few of these red herrings that might occasionally trip up a student, and they spend all their time in analysis on this intentionally planted sidebar that really isn't central to the question at hand. And really that's kind of what students need to learn how to do, is what information is important, what information can really be kind of culled away. So that to me is what I think a great case study looks like. Moving down a second time, just real quick, maybe another 30-second break. What are the incentives and rewards for writing a case study? And so this, I'd really like you to look in the mirror and say, I just want to make a couple quick points on this one. What are some of the reasons to write? Just as the reason to teach a case, writing a case, it just contributes to